Today on Nozzlehead Notes Podcast, we're going to be talking about a couple things here that are current and top of mind, and that is, one, what's going to happen to my residual herbicide out there, but given the weather conditions, and two, what should I plan on and how do I prioritize what I'm doing next for field operations? All right, Jared, we're back. Another Nozzlehead Notes podcast here, and today we're going to talk about a couple topics. First one up is going to be what's going to happen to my pre-herbicide that's out there. And I think you and I are probably going to have a little bit different answers here, depending on our geography.
That's right. And hopefully you can hear me good, Brady. I'm joining you actually out in the countryside today. Looking at how our territories have differed, you in Nebraska, me, Missouri, Illinois, I think our rainfall has been quite different. So the one thing when you get the question or you ask me about what's happening to our residual products, our pre's that we put out there, in my mind, I got a lot of positives because we've had a lot of rain, right? And as we think about how pre-herbicides work, we want to get them on the ground and we want to get them worked into that soil profile so they're available for weed uptake and control. And so we all often call that activating rain. We've had plenty of it down here. So for the folks in my geography that have had, their pre's out and they've got this rain on it, we all can have confidence that it's working. And so to me, I got a lot of great things to think about. We got some burn downs on when you got a lot more to go, but those with residual in them, we've got them working in for us. Right.
Right. And, us, like you said, Nebraska's a little bit different. It's been dry here and it's been windy. And so the wind dries it out even more. And we've got guys get trouble getting planters in the ground and everything else like that. And, we're in a situation, we've got guys with irrigation. They're probably okay. They can get some activation through moisture there, but we've got some dry conditions that we're hoping for. But I think one of the messages we want to is have a little patience here, right? And when you're looking at this, and we're very dry, hoping to get conditions where we're able to get our herbicides out. For us, we're looking for that moisture for activation, but it's not something I think we have to have right away, right after application. There's different ways that we were talking earlier about how different ways that herbicides break down. And so why don't you talk a little bit about that and we'll continue.
Well, and back to what you're saying, right? Every chemistry is going to be a little bit different. I mean, if we think about those products that are not activated in your situation that are dry, some things like a Prowl or a Treflan would really need worked in. They're volatile. Frankly, sunlight breaks them down. So they can sit out there for a shorter period of time before we really need to get those worked in to protect them from those losses. I mean, there's lots of ways to lose herbicides. We can have leaching is another way, but most of the herbicides we use today actually bind to the soil fairly well. And once we get that activating rain, basically how they work, how long they last is based on rate and the weather conditions that we have. So back to in your situation, the yellow chemistries, they probably needed worked in, but most of the others are pretty stable.
Right, exactly. So then when they break down, we're looking at something like what we call photolysis, which is breakdown by sunlight, which is probably common for a lot of the products here. Exposure out there, just laying there, repeatedly exposed to different things like that. And there's multiple factors that go into that breakdown, temperature being one of them and other things, but obviously sunlight over time be how they break down. And so as we talk about that, I think the old school rule of thumb that I grew up with or kind of was raised on in weed science school is that, you got roughly 3 to 4 weeks of it out there. And before you really start to lose significant enough amounts that you don't have anything out there. Pre-herbicides are a little bit different, right? I mean, post, we talk about having enough rate and getting into the plant. With pre's, what we talk about it, you can have activity from an ounce. It's just a matter of how long it's going to last. And an ounce may not last very long. So we need higher rates to get more residual type of thing. So, but all of them have to be activated. And so as they sit there, now we have seen with the products, some of the newer products like Zidua actually has a really good resistance to photolysis or tolerance to phytolysis, if I could say that.
It's just stable. I mean, right. It's not as easily broken down by that sunlight.
Exactly. And so, it's going to last. And we've seen some studies showing where it's lasting 5, 6 weeks, maybe even more type of thing like that out there. So probably one of the longer ones that we deal with. So that's good news from that standpoint. I think big picture, you look at this, whether you're dry or even if you're seeing continuing rains in some situations, is have a little bit of patience and then work with what you got type of thing. I don't think it's something we have to panic on right away. It's not going to break down in 2 days or 3 days or a week and be gone. But you got to be monitoring this. If we go prolonged periods where it's been very dry for us, if it continues, then we'll make adjustments and move on to plan B.
And I think you bring up something there to kind of sum this topic up that I feel very confident in the products we bring to the market, whether that's Verdict or Armazon Pro or Residual Pro or even straight good Residual or Outlook. They are very consistent in getting activation, that they're persistent enough where if we get some adverse conditions, they're still there and we can have confidence in them. Probably the thing to watch more is how long from the time you planted till, we need the next shot, right? And that weather will influence that. And if you had to wait to plant because of the weather, like down here, we got some of these pre-herbicides on, and we're going to wait a couple weeks. Probably we need to be thinking about that next shot in crop moving a little sooner on the crop growth stage, not necessarily on the calendar, just because we've been using that residual time clock up a little bit. So again, I'm with you. I think we got a lot of confidence regardless of our varying weather conditions we're experiencing, but the products that you put out, especially with BASF products, we've got some ones that are going to be there you can have confidence in.
Exactly. So kind of leads us in a little bit to our next one where we're talking about here about what do I look at for prioritizing what I'm going to do next type of thing like that, given that I may have not got a pre-down, maybe I've got a pre-down a while ago, those type of things like that. What should we look at going to for our next step and kind of planning our attack on these weeds?
Yeah. So I think once it dries up enough down here, which some of it's happening today, we're going to see a lot of sprayers and a lot of planters start going. To me, first and foremost, if anybody's got any crops in the ground that does not have a protection of a herbicide on there for weeds, that would be my first priority. What I would call naked seed. There's a really important window there from the time of that crop getting up and in its early life that weeds are really detrimental to its yield potential. And so that weed-free window is what we need to really focus on. And so if you have something in the ground right now without a herbicide on it, that, in my opinion, should be priority one. After that, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think that's the thing is that that's the first priority, and that's what you got to get. And especially beans become real sensitive to that if they don't have anything down in front of them. That worries me because we do have a few options that are early post available for corn, but beans, that those options narrow up, and so we have less options there. And I think the other reality is that in 2022 we're dealing with that not everybody probably has as much of everything as they want, so supply comes back up. But I think the thing where you're headed with this is that you got to have a plan, and you got to know what you want to do, and you got to be working through this. Real easy to outrun the sprayer with the planter because of the size and the amount of acres they cover. But I think whether you're a retailer going after it or if you're a grower, even with their own sprayer, you got to manage things and try to be the best plan you possibly can to. And like you said, making sure that, hey, we got something exposed out there, we want to get after it. You've probably got some different winter annual growth than what I do with the rain and stuff like that. So you've got some woollier situations, in drier conditions, you may be able to take that corn and say, okay, we're going to deal with that when it comes up, but I really got to get something down in front of the beans now too with that. And, especially our dry land acres, which we're not able to activate herbicides with and those type of things. Okay, so, when we talk about this, one of the dangers or watchouts is that we can actually get in too big a hurry when we're really pressured for the time and we're trying to figure out what to prioritize. So we visited earlier on some of the watchouts, like we said here, of what can happen if we're trying to push too hard.
Yeah, obviously the easiest one to get mixed up is getting the wrong field with the wrong chemicals. So, make sure you do when you stick with your plan, you're in the right spot, you know what's in your tank. But the other one that I commonly run across, or the question that we get is, we're going really fast. We're trying to chase that planter because that's obviously what I told you to do here, right? Get those naked acres covered. But if we're in marginal ground and we're leaving those slots open and we've got seeds exposed, exposing those seeds or seedlings to raw chemical in an open frill situation could be pretty detrimental. Those young plants or seeds don't have the ability to metabolize herbicides like a more mature or seedling plant with leaves on it. And so therefore it puts us at more of a risk for a stand impact. And so that is a scenario to watch. And if you're chasing that planter, grounds may be marginal. Double check and make sure all those furrows are closed, because if they're not, we may have to wait a little bit till we get some rain to close those up.
Yep. No, I think that's exactly right. We talk about that, and we watch out of auxins and being used and those type of things like that. We just got to be aware of that, because if we're not getting that furrow closed, that exposes it to a lot, whether it's corner beans, and can be an issue. So I think overall, taking the time to make sure that's happening. I know we got a lot of acres to cover, but man, if we're not closing that furrow, we can have a lot of trouble later on. Even if there wasn't chemical involved, we know agronomically we can have issues. So we still want to make sure we're getting that planter running right. And then, like you said, I think big one, right chemical, right field. That's a huge one. So,
Yep.
Kind of to wrap this up here, when we're talking about it here, guys, with your residuals, I think the message right now is don't panic either way, whether you're too wet or you're too dry. And let's give it a little bit of patience and see where things go. We've got some time with that. But we want to be aware that if conditions don't change, then what's our plan B and where we're moving to? And then that leads us into prioritizing what we do next. We talked about getting naked acres or beans and corn that don't have anything on them, especially the beans, trying to get that residual piece down and be able to value from that. So I think all in all, again, it's a little bit of a fun start to another spring, but at the end, we just kind of stick with it and get everything to work out in the end.
That's right. Thanks, everybody. We'll hopefully talk to you again next week.
Be sure to like and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Otherwise, like if you're listening on SoundCloud.